Welcome to our cultivation segment. My name is Sam Andrasko, and I am a cultivating mycologist, consultant. I grow mushrooms for a living, and today we're going to show you how to make up your own mushroom growing kits at home. So first thing I want to go over with you guys is that mushrooms require some form of carbon, a little bit of nitrogen to grow and to fruit. So the things that we're going to need today are a substrate. Today we're going to use either Coir, and I'm going to show you how to use hardwood pellets to make your mushroom kit. Mushrooms can also grow on cardboard. They can grow on leaves, as long as they're dry. Straw, we can use wood shavings, sawdust. It doesn't have to be in the pellet form, but I'm going to show you an easy way to grow mushrooms on pellets today, because it's just super simple. And we'll also need some spawn. The home cultivator usually isn't going to be doing all of the lab work. There's plenty of stores out there online and in certain cities where you can go and you can buy what they call grain spawn or sawdust spawn. I have an example of sawdust spawn here. This is sawdust that's been hydrated and inoculated with a certain type of mushroom, in this case Shiitake mushrooms. And from there, what we do in the lab is we gather a mushroom in the wild. And this mushroom has some certain type of characteristic that we like. And what we do is we bring it home and we clone it. And we open the mushroom up and take little pieces of sterile tissue out of the inside. We stick it on agar and we grow it out. And once we have a nice, pure, clean culture, we expand that onto either the grain or the sawdust or some type of special media that we make up to allow the mushroom to propagate and create a nice, sterile media from which the mushroom can jump off of into our substrate. And the substrate provides the cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin that the mushrooms are going to digest to produce fruit bodies. So let's get going here. I heated some water up, so we have some water to pasteurize our media. And the first one I want to show you is how to make Sawdust Bag. This is a method if you look this up online, most everybody is calling this the wtih. And what happens is we're going to use these hardwood fuel pellets. And you can get these at Lowe's, Home Depot, Tractor Supply, but you want to make sure they're hardwood. If you use pine or Douglas fir, those type of pellets, the only mushroom you're going to really be able to use with those is Pleurotus pulmonaris. They can digest it pretty well, as well as shiitake, but I wouldn't recommend it. So we're going to stick to hardwood pellets. This is a competition blend. It's kind of a mixture of alder and oak and mesquite, kind of like all the remnants put together. And just pick the cheapest bag of hardwood pellets you can find. I think they run about $20 a bag or so for a 20-pound bag of basically $1 a pound. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a bag. In this case, I recommend using an HDPE bag or a polypropylene bag because they both can sustain high temperatures. This is a myco bag. This has a filter patch on it, and in the mushroom industry we use these to sterilize substrates in an autoclave, so they can withstand up to about 260 degrees or so. And what we're going to do So we're going to take 4 cups of hardwood pellets. We're going to stick it in our bag, just like that. So this is a quart deli cup of pellets. And we're going to be really careful. And so this is a 4 cup, 1 quart little saucepan. Be really careful. We're going to take some hot water, kind of slide it inside and pour it in. And what we're doing is we're pasteurizing the wood pellets. We want to shoot kind of towards the middle, around between 150 and 160. And all we're going to do is take the air out of the bag and fold it over. And we're going to let it sit overnight. What do they call these? Drip mats for your dishes, and just kind of wrap it up. Just cover it on top and just let it sit there overnight. And once it's cool, you're going to end up with a bag of sawdust that's nice and hydrated. You don't want it too wet. If it's too wet, you're going to suffocate the mushrooms. So what we want it to look like, it's going to still be really gritty, but it's still going to be wet. And if you squeeze it, you can kind of hear it like a sponge. And there's going to be like a little bit of, you're going to hear the moisture inside of it. If you get a few drops, that's okay. But if you get a nice stream of water, no, that's too much water. So try it again and with a lesser amount of water. Some of the wood pellets are going to take more water. Some are going to take less to hydrate. So experiment with your wood pellets before you start making your bags. So this is some mushroom spawn. This is Hericium erinaceus. All the different mushrooms, the spawn's going to look different colors, different growth patterns. Some are going to look fluffy, some are going to look really wispy, like the lion's mane. So the lion's mane might actually have some fruit bodies growing on it. It's okay, just break up the fruit bodies with the spawn and spawn with it. As you know, don't worry about the fruit bodies if there's any in the spawn. The colors can vary from orange to like a black. They can be white, kind of grayish color. For today, we have lion's mane. And this lion's mane is growing on oats. We're going to break it up to where all the kernels are in individual pieces. You want to break it all up. So spawn, the rate of spawn that we're going to introduce needs to be a minimum of 3 to 5%. All the way up to about 20%. Today, we're going to use probably half of this bag for this 5-pound block. And this is about 2 pounds of grain spawn. And so the idea here is that we propagate mycelium on the grains. And then when we break them up, they disperse into the substrate to the point where they can grow and attach to each other very quickly. If we were to take one piece of grain and stick it in there, it would take a long time for it to grow all the way through the bag. And that's how it happens in nature. You get one spore that germinates, meets up with another spore, and it takes a long time, almost 6 months to colonize a substrate. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to speed that up. And what it also does is we're trying to get ahead of contamination. So if there is any other microbial activity in here, the more spawn we use, the better chances we're going to have of it colonizing the substrate before another competitor mold or bacteria takes a hold. So to inoculate the bag, just open it up, open your bag of spawn, pour it in, save your spawn for later. You can tape the top of it and throw it back in the fridge. Gather the top of the bag up and just shake it up. That's it. Just kind of knock all the extra sawdust off the side of the bag. If there's still some sticking on it, no big deal. Take the top of the bag, make sure that the filter patch doesn't get wound up where you're gonna cinch it, and just take a zip tie or a twisty tie and just tie the top of it. And all you gotta do is just set that bag aside, and in about 2 to 3 weeks, you'll see a lot of mycelium start to coat the inside of the bag. And once it's pure white, you can fruit the bag. In the case of lion's mane, you can just make a hole about 1 inch down from the, just take a knife and poke a slit in it. It only needs to be about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, about 1 inch down from the top of the substrate. And then set the bag into fruiting conditions, and the lion's mane will come out and fruit on the outside of the bag. And when it's done, you can just twist it off and cook it up. So that's how you make a sawdust bag. I recommend doing it this way. It's just super simple. You can do it in the kitchen, and just makes it really easy. You can do it with the kids, do it as a couple together for fun, date night. So other mushrooms that you can use this way are Pleurotus syringii, the king oyster. You can do reishi mushrooms. Reishi is the same way. Once it colonizes, you just poke a little hole in the bag and it just comes out of the bag. The king oysters most likely will fruit on top of the bag, so you have to cut the top of the bag off and stick it in a high humidity environment, like a little fruiting container, which I'll show you how to make. And what else? We can do regular oyster mushrooms, yellow, pink, white, blue, gray, Pleurotus pulmonarius, the summer oyster, and let's see what else. Shiitake mushrooms. Shiitake mushrooms will be a lot different. Shiitake mushrooms need to colonize the substrate for a good 2 to 3 months. What they do is they form a nice brown skin on the bag. Once the brown skin starts to develop and you start seeing fluid in the bag build up at the very bottom, they're ready to fruit. What you'll do is you'll take the bag and you'll stick it in the fridge. And stick it in the fridge for a couple days, and then pull it out, take the whole block out of the bag, and agitate it by slapping it around, and then set it inside of your fruiting container, and all the mushrooms will start fruiting out of the block. You'll see these little fissures open up. It's called blistering, and then the fissures will open up and they'll look like white on the inside, and then the primordial will come out, and the rest of the shiitake will start fruiting, and it takes about 2.5 weeks for the whole fruiting cycle to get through its little set of flush, which is what we call when a mushroom bag fruits. We have 1 flush. Usually shiitake, you can get two good flushes off of it. Oyster mushrooms can get up to 3 flushes. As the flushes go on, you'll get less and less mushrooms, but they'll get bigger and bigger, usually. So that's one way to make up a fruiting kit at home. Another way is to use some coir. This is coconut coir made from processing coconuts. There's tons of this stuff coming out of the Asian countries, especially the Philippines. And you can get it at a hydro shop, a gardening center. You can just buy little blocks online. It's fairly simple to make. You can also use straw. If you want to use the straw, you'll have to shred it up. You can buy pre-shredded straw sometimes at like Tractor Supply. But if you want to shred it up and you don't have a shredder at home or a chipper, you can just take a big tote, plastic tote, put the straw inside and take your weed whacker and just stick it in there and just weed whack it all until it's nice and shredded. You can also just pile up a bunch of straw in your yard, run it over with the lawnmower. If you have a bag attachment on your lawnmower, you can just have it like go right up into it and then pour it out. And then you need to pasteurize it. So a word about the fuel pellets. So when they process these fuel pellets, there's a die in the machine, and it basically, there's a roller with a circular die, and the die has a bunch of holes in it. And the sawdust goes into this die, and this roller just runs over this die. And what happens is it creates a lot of friction, and as it extrudes the pellets out of this die, it heats them up. So it's basically pasteurizing the sawdust pellets. So that's why I recommend using the sawdust pellets at home, because they're already pretty much pasteurized when you get them. They're really clean. So all we have to do is just repasteurize them just to be on the safe side. And it just makes it a lot easier to grow the mushrooms without having to deal with too much contamination. The same thing happens when they do these core blocks. These core actually has beneficial microbes that kind of help protect the substrate itself. That's why a lot of people who grow plants and hydroponics like to use it, because it tends to not get funky real easily. And so to pasteurize our material, whether it be straw or cardboard, if you have the cardboard, just cut it all up into little pieces, about 1 inch. And it's good to mix the substrates together. So if you have a little bit of straw, a little bit of core, a little bit of newspaper or paper, and just kind of mix them up to give a nice open media. A little bit of air inside. You don't want it to be like, if you had a bunch of cardboard and it was flat, it'd probably get really like matty, like a mat. And that's not good for the fungus. You want a little bit of air in there so the fungus has some breathing room, because fungi breathe like we do. They breathe in oxygen, they use oxygen, and they release carbon dioxide after they digest their food. So we want to make sure that the substrate is not too compact, not too wet. So the way that we pasteurize the core or the straw is really easy. Go to Home Depot or Lowe's, and they have these paint strainer bags. They come in a set of 2, like $3, something like that. They use it to strain out dry paint out of paint, that's still in usable form, but you don't want to brush the dry paint onto your surfaces. So it's just a nylon mesh bag. Nylon can take the heat. So all you want to do is just take this bag, throw your substrate inside, tie the top a little bit. You could use a twist tie or whatever. Tie it up, throw it in a 5-gallon bucket. I'm going to take the one I pre-pasteurized out for you guys to show you. Just stick it in the bucket very carefully. Take some hot water that you got to boiling and shut off. Wait about 5 minutes, and then just pour it all in. The core is going to expand, and the straw probably won't. It'll actually reduce in size. And so what you're going to do, if you have a plate that's big enough, you can kind of set it on top, and then take something insulative like a towel or a couple of towels, or some hand mitts or whatever's going to close up the top of the bucket. And it could even be the lid, but I still recommend putting something insulative on top. It could be a piece of styrofoam, and let it sit for about an hour. Once an hour has gone by, pull it out and set it somewhere where it can drain. In the case of core, you might have to squeeze a little bit of the moisture out. And in the case of straw, you're just going to have to let it sit. Once you get most of the water on the straw, you can set it on a piece of newspaper, and the newspaper will absorb any extra moisture that kind of accumulates under it. Once we're done, we have a nice big bag of pasteurized substrate. We can pour it into a bowl. Before you get started, take a little bit of bleach solution, follow the directions. You can use alcohol as well. Clean your area. So sanitize your area, follow the directions for surface disinfection. So whatever it says on the label, follow it to the T. Don't use too much. You don't need to. I recommend alcohol or bleach, diluted bleach, or you could use some Lysol surface disinfectant. I don't believe I have any of that. But like all-purpose Lysol all-purpose cleaner. I'm not talking about the spray. I'm talking about like the diluted mix that you can buy for doing floors and cleaning surface, you know, like countertops and stuff. Clean your work area, and depending on what you're fruiting. So if you're fruiting oyster mushrooms, I recommend doing it in a bag, an ice bag. It could be just any bag that you can basically get your hand into. This one's a little small for the inside, but we can deal with it. It can even be a bag from, like, say, Sprouts. Don't be afraid to use these bags. Rinse it out before you do it. Spray it with a little bit of your surface bleach. It's okay to spray it with the bleach because once you put the substrate in, it's going to dilute it enough to where it's not going to harm the mycelium. So just kind of spray the inside of the bag with the bleach, let it sit for a little bit, and then, in fact, we'll use that for this. So we're going to imagine that I sprayed this with bleach. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our spawn. In this case, I have some Agaricus blazei spawn. This is the Almond Portobello mushroom. It tastes and smells amazing, just like almonds, kind of reminiscent of like when you make like almond extract cookies in the house and the whole house starts smelling like almonds. This mushroom smells just the same, tastes amazing, and it grows in the summertime. That's another thing that you probably want to consider is, like, we live in San Diego, and the humidity levels in San Diego probably average about 30% humidity. So probably not ideal for cultivating mushrooms in. However, during this part of the year, we do get our rainy season, and it's a good time to do your fruiting and grow your mushroom kits and have a lot of fun with that. And Agaricus blazei fruits from the top. So I would recommend, if you're doing blazei, to fruit it in a container such as this. You can get one of these at Home Depot. You could also fruit it in a tray, say like this. Like this is for like sprouting grains in. You could place it in there and put some aluminum foil over the top. Poke some holes, a few holes in it so it can breathe. And once it's colonized, you can take the foil off and stick it in your fruiting chamber and fruit it. If you're using oyster mushrooms, I recommend doing it in a bag. And once it's colonized, you can just poke a few holes in the bag, and the mushrooms will actually come right out of the bag, out of those holes. King oysters, you could also do just like the blazei inside of a tub like this. Reishi mushrooms, I wouldn't recommend doing on Coir, as well as the lion's mane. They don't really like to grow too well on Coir. But oyster mushrooms, Agaricus blazei grows really well on it. What else do we grow on Coir? Of course, the summer oysters, like the pink oyster, yellow oyster, and the pulmonaris will grow readily on it as well. But for the reishi, trametes, versicolor, lion's mane, I'd stick with the sawdust. They love sawdust and they fruit really well on it. So I'll show you how to inoculate substrate here. So all we're going to do is just open up our substrate. First we break it up, the individual kernels, open it up, pour the whole bag in. You can wear gloves. If you don't want to waste gloves, I'm sure there's not a lot of, gloves are pretty expensive right now. Just wash your hands with soap and water, 20 seconds, rinse for another 10 seconds, dry them up. That's just fine. We're only pasteurizing the material, so this isn't sterile, it's just sanitary. And so take your hands and mix all your spawn into it. Smells like almonds right now. It's amazing. Even the mycelium smells. So If this was oyster mushrooms, I would just dump it, mix it, dump it straight into the bag, tie the bag up, twist it nice and tight, and take a little thin nail and poke some holes in it so it can breathe. Set it in a nice cool, dry, or a cool place where it's not getting sunlight. You don't want it to get hot. You want it to keep it, for oyster mushrooms, you want to keep it anywhere between 65 and 75 degrees. The blazii can take up to 85 degrees, anywhere between 70 and 85 degrees during colonization. If you're going to fruit it outdoors, it can get a little hotter. It can be in the 90s. It's kind of a warm weather mushroom. Pleurotus pulmonaris can fruit, as well as the pink oysters and the yellow oysters, the cornucopia. Those mushrooms are tropical oysters, and they can fruit in hot temperatures up like in 80s, 85 degrees. However, they fruit much better in cooler temperatures like in the mid 70s. If you're fruiting winter oysters, you want to keep it anywhere from between 60 and 75 degrees. They're going to fruit better at a colder temperature. If you're doing the Pleurotus oryngii, the king oyster, you want to keep it on the cool side. They don't really like warm weather. They don't fruit very well in the warm weather. So we have our substrate. This is Agaricus blazii. We take our substrate, we put it in a bin. Don't pack it down. Just leave it nice and loose. Just kind of mix it around, get it nice and straight. Take a towel and get all the extra substrate off the edge of the container. You can put a lid on and just poke some holes in the lid. They don't have to be big holes, probably about a 1/16 of an inch in diameter. Put like 6 or 7 holes on the top and take it and just set it in a nice cool place inside your house, out of the direct sunlight, not by a window. You don't want it to heat up. Let it colonize. Once it turns white, you can stick it in your fruiting container and just give it a little misting here and there every day, maybe twice, maybe 3 times a day, just whenever you think about it, when you walk by it. With the blazii, in about a month and a half, it'll start fruiting. With the oysters, like they'll start fruiting in almost 3 weeks. Reishi will start fruiting in about 30 days or so. If you were doing a shiitake block, like I said, it takes a good 3 months to do that. Like I said, the shiitake blocks will be ready when you start seeing fluid develop in the bottom of the bag, this like reddish, brownish fluid. And you'll take it out, again, you'll take it out, just kind of rinse it off under the water, stick it in the fridge, let it cool off for a couple of days at a low temperature to cold shock it, pull it out, slap it around. You don't have to use your hands. You could just grab a spatula, just kind of hit the outside of the block a little bit, and then stick it inside of your fruiting container and let it fruit. To fruit the substrate, I'm gonna show you how to do this at the house, in home, because here in San Diego, obviously, it's not a good place outside to fruit mushrooms, except for maybe shiitake, because they like to fruit here in the summertime in the shade on logs, and as well as the reishi. The reishi can take higher temperatures. Reishi can tolerate up into the 80 degrees. However, a word about humidity. So the hotter the air temperature gets, the more moisture holding capacity it has. So when the air is say 60 degrees, it's really easy to humidify the air because it doesn't hold a lot of moisture in the air. However, when you move up into like 80 degrees, it's going to take 3 times that amount of moisture to make the humidity high and allow the mushrooms to fruit. So you kind of like try to focus on getting in between those temperatures and just kind of like getting the most humidity as you possibly could. To produce humidity in the house, we can use what we call a shotgun box. So get yourself a container, nice big tote. Nice big tote. The bigger the better, actually. The reason for it being if you have a large tote, like say this long, it has a lot more oxygen inside as opposed to a smaller tote. However, this size tote would be fine for fruiting maybe 2 blocks maximum. I recommend just 1. So they call it a shotgun box because it looks like it has a bunch of holes in it, like someone shot a bunch of bird shot through there. And so get yourself either 1/8 or 1/4 inch drill, and drill a gazillion holes in it, as many as you can. Do the bottom, the sides. You don't have to do the top, but you can. While I have this tote here, so I did this to show you both. So a shotgun box will have all the holes in it. Another version of fruiting is called a monotub. In a monotub, we'll have a couple like big 3/4 inch to 1 inch holes. You can cover them with some micropore tape, which is like surgical tape. You can get it at Walgreens or CVS or something. Anywhere they have a pharmacy, you'll find it. It's kind of like a filter tape. It acts like a filter. And what you can do, I've seen a lot of people lately growing reishi in it. Reishi, when grown in a high CO2 environment, produces what they call the antler form of the reishi. It doesn't get sessile like the ones that you see outdoors, where it's just kind of like a big plain cap. So instead, you'll get these like antlers, and they look like big worms, reddish, yellow, and blackish worms that fruit up. And those fruit bodies are just as good as the sessile type of fruitings. What you can do is when you make up your sawdust substrate, you can still do it in the bag. Instead, though, you're going to take all that substrate, you're going to pour it inside of here. You're going to make sure that the holes are more than 4 inches up from the bottom of the container, and mix all your spawn in. More spawn the better. Smooth it all out. Again, don't pack it because you want some air to be exchanged through the substrate, and pour it all in there. And this is kind of like a set it and forget it type of apparatus. You'll put all your spawn, all your substrate in there after you pasteurize it, close it up, and just let it sit. It'll colonize the substrate, and once it colonizes, it'll sit there and kind of go into a little dormancy period for maybe a week or 2, and then you'll start to see fruit bodies develop. You still don't have to open it up at that time unless you see it kind of drying out inside. If you do, take a spray bottle, set the tip to where it sprays a nice mist, and mist the inside. Now, you don't want to mist it until it gets like really wet and soppy inside. You just want to mist it to where there's little water droplets just sitting on top of the substrate. Because mushrooms don't actually absorb moisture from the air. They actually release it. So what we're trying to do is conserve the moisture in the air and allow them, so you don't want too much evaporation to occur off the fruit bodies. So the less evaporation is occurring, the mushrooms aren't going to dry out. So you want to keep the humidity high in there, and that's going to be done by the substrate itself inside of here. So we're allowing a little bit of air exchange. Once the substrate is colonized, you can actually take a couple of these pieces of micropore tape off a couple holes inside to increase the amount of air exchange that's going into the container. And then that's it. Just let them fruit. You could also do the Orangeii like that. They can fruit in high CO2 environments. In fact, the Orangeii you buy in the store, the big ones that look like the big bowling pins, they're actually grown in high CO2 environments like that. If you grow them in more atmospheric levels of oxygen and CO2 levels, the they actually fruit more like an oyster, where they kind of like plane out. But yeah, the reishi, the king oysters you can grow inside of a monotub. What else could you? You can grow regular oyster mushrooms in there like that and just fruit them off the top. But once they start fruiting, you might want to give them a little bit more air because oyster mushrooms require more oxygen. So you just open the lid and just kind of cock it a little bit and just watch inside. If it's drying out too much, just kind of close it up a little bit more and just mist it every day. The other method is if we're making sawdust blocks or bags, we can also just do the shotgun box. So the shotgun box is a little bit different. We're going to make a humidity chamber. You can take the bag that you bought, the nylon paint strainer bag, throw a bunch of coarse perlite. I know this isn't coarse, but this is all I had. Put some coarse perlite in there. The medium perlite's fine. The fine perlite probably isn't going to work that great. So take it, put it in your paint strainer bag, put it in the sink, get it nice and wet. Just turn your faucet on. You could actually sanitize your sink, fill it with water, and just kind of dip it in there. Let it drain out, and then pour it inside of your shotgun box like this. You want to get about 4 inches of perlite in there or so. And yes, you want to have holes on the bottom, on the sides. You want air to be able to come inside. And what happens here is all of this wet perlite, we just took a small space inside of this container and increased the amount of surface area that the water can evaporate from by placing the perlite in there. So as the air gently comes into the container, it starts evaporating this water and creating a nice humidified environment above the perlite. And all you have to do is just take your kit, poke your holes in it after it's colonized, and just set it in here. And the mushrooms will come out and fruit right inside of the container. You can do this inside of your house. The only requirement is that there has to be some kind of air movement inside the house. It doesn't have to be a lot. It could just be like your air conditioning, moving the air inside of the house. You could have a door open or a window, just kind of a little breeze, because that breeze is going to come through these holes and pick up that moisture and then take it up into the top part of this container and give your mushrooms a nice humidified environment to fruit from. Very simple. Like I said, you don't have to put holes in the lid. Some people like to make a couple of these and then stack them. So you don't want any excess moisture dripping down on the mushrooms themselves. If you do have to spray the mushrooms, they look kind of dry. Again, it's just like spraying the mycelium. You just want to spray it enough to where you see like little micro droplets sitting on the cap. Let those evaporate first before you mist it again. And as long as you do that and keep it nice and humid, the mushrooms will fruit just fine. I'm going to show you how to make a shiitake block, or reishi block, or Trametes versicolor block, or lion's mane. You could also do foliotas, however they fruit in some colder weather. We could also do brick caps. There's many other mushrooms, but the ones that I recommend here in San Diego, just because we have a warm climate, are the reishi, the hericium. Hericium actually grows here in the wild on oak trees. And Trametes versicolor grows here as well in the springtime and the fall. But the most common one is shiitake. So join me outside and we're going to show you how to create your own shiitake log. Okay, here we are outside. I'm going to show you how to inoculate a shiitake block. You can also do reishi and lion's mane like this. You're going to want some sawdust spawn, as well as the shiitake and the reishi. It needs to be in the form of sawdust. The way we're going to do this, we're going to drill holes inside of the log. about 6 inches apart, 4 to 6 inches apart, staggered all the way around the block. And what we're going to use is a plug inoculator, just like this. Has a little hole in the end of the shaft and something to push the spawn into the hole with. They also sell birch dowels that are already inoculated with the mushroom itself, and you can just pound them into the holes and then cover them with wax. You can use paraffin wax, you can use a mixture of beeswax and paraffin, or just beeswax itself. Doesn't really matter. They all work pretty much similar. If you don't like the idea of using paraffin wax, go ahead and just buy yourself some beeswax candles and melt them down, and you can use that. So all you're going to need is your wax. You're going to heat up the wax inside of a little can outside or on your stove and bring it out to wherever you're working. You'll need a little brush to apply the wax over the holes, to seal the holes with. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we have our spawn with us. I'm going to open the bag up, just get it ready. You don't have to squeeze it or break it up or anything, just leave it just like it is. You can use a drill bit. Just make sure that the drill bit is exactly the same size or a little bit bigger than your plug inoculator, or in the case of the dowels, just try to make sure it's pretty much the same size as the dowels, because you're going to be beating it into the hole. I prefer to use a grinder with this bit attachment. These little bits can be purchased online at a lot of the mushroom supply houses. Stamets has fungi.com. You can get bits and spawn. You can get, who else? Field and Forest is a good place. They have all the supplies and spawn you're going to need to make your log. So what we're going to do is, use some safety glasses. In this case, I had this available. Just going to use a little shield here, and we're going to drill every 4 to 6 inches. We're going to stagger them. The more holes you use, the easier it's going to be for the mushrooms to take a hold, just like the spawn inside of our substrate. The more you use, the quicker it's going to come together, the quicker it's going to get a hold of or ahead of the contamination and colonize the whole log. So we're going to drill it out a little bit. So now we have our holes in the log. I'm not going to do the whole thing. I'm just doing this as a demo for you guys. So what we're going to do, we're going to take our bag of spawn. We're going to take the plug inoculator. We're just going to punch it straight into the spawn so that we fill the end of the plug inoculator with the spawn. We're going to push it in the hole. Once you get all of your holes filled, you're going to take your wax. You just use a little can. Cool enough. And we're going to coat the outside of the holes with the wax. Just going to seal up these holes so that the spawn doesn't dry out. Another thing I didn't mention, you might want to make sure that you put enough spawn into the holes to where it's nice and flush at the outside before you put the wax on, because otherwise you're going to have to keep turning the log and try to fill in, wasting a lot of wax trying to fill in the holes. Once you have all of those, all the holes waxed up and sealed, I feel like it's a really good idea to paint the ends of the logs. So if you have any extra exterior paints or even interior paint, like flat or gloss, doesn't matter. Just paint the ends of the logs to kind of help keep the moisture inside so they don't dry out too much. And then all you have to do is stick this log under a good tree to stick it under is like a nice big avocado tree with a lot of lush leaves. I like fig trees, work really well. Just any place maybe on the north side of your building that gets shade all day. You don't want to put them in the sun. You can actually build a little shade hut with some PVC pipe in the ground, use some pieces of rebar, and just bend some PVC pipe down, put a shade cloth over the top, and all you have to do is just put like a little mister. You can go to Home Depot and they have those little mister wands that just kind of sit on the ground, and put it on a timer and let it mist the room maybe twice a day, get it nice and wet, just keep the area moist and cool. And in about 6 months, you'll start to see mycelium start growing out of the edges of the bark on the wood. And once that happens, it's almost ready to fruit. So just kind of increase the watering intervals and keep the logs wet. Not too wet. You don't want like to soak them or anything. Just so that they look moist, but not like pools of water sitting in between the bark. And then let them fruit out. Shiitake, like to, if you get some warm weather shiitake strain, it'll fruit right in the middle of the winter time or the summertime, the beginning and the end of sometimes. If you're going to inoculate them in the fall, I'd get a winter strain that'll fruit in the cold weather. Just depends on where you are. Here in San Diego, like I said, most of the year it's going to be hot. So find yourself a nice, cool, shady area to put your log in. The reishi, like the heat, they're gonna fruit more in the summer, early summer periods, as well as the shiitake usually fruits in the beginning of the summer when it just starts warming up, not when it's like super hot. Termites, same thing. Types of wood. So here in San Diego, we're kind of limited. There's a lot of pepper trees that get cut down. You can use pepper for the termites and the reishi. In fact, reishi grow wildly here on pepper trees. We have a Ganoderma called Ganoderma polychromum, which grows on almost every pepper tree I've ever seen in San Diego at some point. And for the shiitake, I recommend barked eucalyptus trees wood and oak wood. This is a piece of ash that we cut down earlier that I wanted to get out of off my property. Ash will fruit. Usually get maybe 1 or 2 fruitings off it. It'll digest really fast. The oak, you're going to get fruitings for probably 3 years or so before it starts to die off. You'll want to select a log that's anywhere from 4 inches to 12 inches in diameter. Anything in between there is like ideal, but we've fruited shiitake on up to 14-inch diameter logs here. The thing is that the larger logs are going to take much longer to colonize. Could take up to a year before they start fruiting, but once they start fruiting, you'll start getting at least 2 fruitings a year. So yeah, just keep them in a nice cool place, let them colonize for a nice good 6-7 months. And for the big logs, it might take longer, like I said. And good luck. Thank you guys for joining me in this cultivation demo. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat boxes or contact me directly through the SD Myco Society. And we do host classes during the year. We'll be trying to do some laboratory classes, culture work, hands-on bed making for Stropharia mushrooms and button mushrooms outdoors. So keep an eye out for these announcements. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. See you later.